Hi and welcome to this week's Life Lessons video. It's great to be back with you all. Do you struggle to understand what or who your inner child is? Perhaps you find the whole concept of having an inner child a little strange and you have no idea where to begin. Or maybe you think you've identified your inner child, but you think you have several inner childs of different ages or with multiple personalities even. Well, in this video, we're going to be going back to basics to help you. We'll explain what the inner child is and when it was formed, how you can begin to identify and understand the unique personality of your inner child and its nature and characteristics, and how having this understanding of your inner child will help you work with your inner child in a much more positive and powerful way. Welcome to our Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons series. In each episode, we answer your questions, reveal the powerful life lesson, and offer you lots of practical tips and advice to help you live in balance, harmony, and flow. Okay, David, so let's start at the beginning. What is the inner child?
So in our model, the inner child is a label to identify a part of your mind. And let me say, first of all, we're not trying to say you're schizophrenic or it's a part of your mind that's floating around.
Or a separate entity.
Or a separate entity or anything like that. It's just trying to put a label on a part of your mind. Some people may call it the ego. Some of my clients will call it their dark side or their shadow side. But I think the best label from my experience is this term inner child, only because a lot of the characteristics do resemble a child.
Okay, so David, when have we always had an inner child, or is it created at a specific point in our life?
Well, in my experience, it gets created. This is the normal pattern that I see, and see if this relates to you. It normally happens with a sensitive child. It normally happens between the ages of 6 years old and 9 years old. And I'm not being prescriptive and say it's got to be that age. I'm just giving you a rough guide. And this is what I find with my work with my clients. Is a sensitive child, so they're really connected to their feelings, but they're not yet developed their cognitive reasoning or understandings. So what happens is there can be one event or a series of events that happen between that age gap, 6 and 9 years old, that create a really strong emotional feeling. And I'm never going to underestimate this feeling if this is you. I'm talking about a tsunami of feeling, a really overwhelming, overpowering feeling that this child is experiencing. Now, they're experiencing the feeling, but they haven't got the cognitive reasoning, the thought power, the understanding, the knowledge to deal with that feeling. So they're in this position where they believe they're going to be engulfed, but they don't know how to deal with it. And I would say that that is the birth of the inner child.
So if I know the Taoists teach that we are born as one, our natural way of being is the oneness of our mind, our body, and our spirit. So what spirit is what the Taoist teaches Shen. So we're as one whole together. And what you're saying is when the child encounters a challenging, traumatic, unfamiliar, painful situation or series of situations in young childhood, so particularly between the ages of 6 and 9, but there is a kind of flexibility there. There is a wriggle room as to when that can happen. That causes such an emotional upheaval within the child that part of its mind gets frozen, gets locked in, almost splits apart from the natural oneness and the natural development of the oneness of who we are.
Yes, and the Taoists call this like a kernel. So the mind goes into like frozen mode, lockdown. Yeah, that's a great word. The mind goes into lockdown. And what we're talking about is this is why we've called this series Life Lessons, because the child is encountering a life lesson. The child is experiencing the intense emotions and feelings, but they haven't got the cognitive reasoning to reason it out and to understand it. And then most people would say, well, why don't they go and speak to their parents or their guardians or their teachers? But don't forget, for a lot of my clients, it could be those people that are creating the problems, the dysfunctional family, dysfunctional parents, being bullied at school, whatever. So the child is locked down. And so lockdown is a great example for this kernel. It puts up this big barrier to protect themselves.
Yeah. And that's the key, isn't it? Because by creating this kind of wall of protection around ourselves, or that part of our mind which is experiencing the really strong emotions, the really strong trauma, that is when the inner child is formed. And so now, as the adult, through inner child work and inner child healing techniques that we teach in a lot of our videos, we need to identify that child first, and then we need to begin to communicate with them, listen to them, and then teach them the life lesson that they never learned at that point in time. So
that's very important, Alex. That's the role. When you're doing, we've done a video on reparenting. That's the role that the adult you has to do to the child you. You have to go back and you have to re-educate the child. And don't think this is an easy job, because that child has been on lockdown for many years.
So we've done a couple of videos on reparenting the inner child, and I will put links to those. We're also going to produce 2 new videos on how do you begin to talk to the inner child, what questions should you ask them, what things do you need to say to them, and they'll be coming very soon. So please don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you get immediate access to those new videos that are coming soon.
And this is so important in your emotional development as a person. Because if you don't do this work, I believe this is almost like an anchor that's always pulling you back. Do you know that experience when you want to move forward, but there's some little voice in your head telling you, no, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. And it's almost like you're living your life and you're doing okay, but you're having to work doubly hard to everybody else because you're pulling this big anchor along with you that the child digs their heels in. That's how it seems when I talk to my client's little child. The little child will dig their heels in and they will not budge. They are the most stubbornest people I've ever met. They will not budge.
So, David, obviously, if you're watching this video, you're interested or definitely already see the need to do this inner child work. But if you're starting from scratch, if you're starting from zero and you've never done this before and you've no idea how on earth, how do I identify my inner child? What techniques can I use to begin to just formulate in my mind an image or a voice that belongs to my inner child, that I can start to have that connection with them?
And this is where it gets a bit more difficult, because there's no one way.
Okay.
Is there? I can't say you've got to do 1, 2, 3, 4 and this will happen, because this is the uniqueness of you. So some of our clients would like to root out a picture of themselves and use that. Some of our clients have got a very strong memory of these times.
Or particular incidences that triggered this lockdown,
Some clients have shut it off and they'll say to me, I don't even remember my childhood. I don't remember nothing about my childhood. It's all a big blur. And these are all the different events. So this is why we're doing these type of videos. So here's one way. This seems to work for a lot of people. When you hear that inner voice, some people call it the inner critic or the inner moaning. I call it the 3 a.m. mind. You know the mind?
Yeah,
when you wake
self-talk,
up,
negative self-talk.
That's the one. Now this is your inner child. So I would call that as the beginning. This is my inner child. So when it starts chatting, oh, we can't do that, oh, we're going to be let down, now let us down, you won't be able to succeed, you're not good enough, you can't cope. If you ever hear one of those 3 lies, I'm not good enough, I can't cope, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, here's your inner child speaking to you. So when you get that resistance, or what I call pushback, when you want to do something, you know it's the right thing to do, and then that little voice chirps up, well, how about if it doesn't go wrong? How about if they let us down? How about if we're not good enough? How about if we fail? How about if we're not perfect? Here's the inner child.
Because by contrast, the voice of our Shen, our higher self, our spirit, is completely different. So the inner child's narrative, if you like, the inner child's self-talk is negative, fearful, doubtful, concerned, anxious, all these negative things. By contrast, the Shen voice is softer, more encouraging, less judgmental, less critical, more softer and quieter, but more truthful.
So let's make that distinction.
Yeah.
So the inner child will always want to go on the familiar and the known.
And protect itself.
Because it believes that keeps it protected. Yeah. Even if it doesn't work. Here's the main teaching. So this is when you keep on doing the same thing that we call the carousel of despair. Some people call it the hamster's wheel. You know what I'm talking about. Even if you know it doesn't work and you keep on doing it and you go, why do I keep doing that? That's the inner child. And as Alex says, in opposition, your Shen, this is the thing, the best way to describe this, isn't it? Inspiration. We've done a video on Shen. Yeah. Inspiration. When that spark of inspiration comes into your mind and you know there's no doubt, you just go and do it. You just step off and you just go and do it. And there's the two different. The inner child is, no, let's go. Oh, it's all them. It's their fault. We'll never change it. I can't. I don't trust myself. It always goes wrong. Yeah. But doubt, worry, fear. Wanting to keep you on the familiar. And this is what people don't understand. The inner child is not worried about you being successful or reaching your heights or being the best that you can be. No. The inner child wants to be protected. It wants to be sure. It wants to be in control. It wants to have known outcomes. It wants to know what's going to happen in the future, how this is going to work out, what people are going to think about it. Goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a great video on understanding the difference between your inner child's voice and the voice of your higher self and your Shen. And I will put a link to that video again because that will give you a lot more inspiration in terms of how to tell the difference and how to connect to your Shen voice and also how to connect to the inner child's voice when you want to do that communication and dialogue with it.
And can I just say one thing? Because a lot of my clients will say this. They're very concerned about doing this work because they think it's somehow upsetting and worrying and upheaval. And they think there's something wrong with them. We all have these inner voices. Every human being, everybody you see on the street, everybody at work, everybody has this inner voice. This is part of being a human being. You are no different. All we're trying to say is embrace it and learn how to deal with it. This does not mean you're going mad or there's something wrong with you. This just means learning a technique that you've always known is there. And hopefully this is what we're doing on these videos, is to say that you can do this. You can do this. You can join our Facebook community and you see there's over 2,000 other people sharing their techniques and you can learn from them and you can offer your techniques. Oh, this worked for me. You might write in, well, I did this and this worked for me. Then you'll get 10 people say, oh, I tried that. That didn't work for me. But this worked for me. And that's what we've got to do because we're all in this together and we've got to find the way that's unique and guides you. There's no one in the universe like you. That's why I can't say, this is what you do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because your journey is unique to you.
And on this unique journey, David, when we begin to start to identify the voice of our inner child, we either through listening to our self-talk, maybe connecting with a visualization to a photograph of ourselves when we were younger, maybe thinking about what memories we have of our childhood, which are the ones that keep coming back to us. The whole range of techniques there. But I know a lot of people say to us, well, hold on, I think I've connected to my inner child, but I'm a bit confused because I think I might have two inner childs, one that's 6 years old and one that's a teenager, and they seem to have completely different personalities, because I think my inner child can be sometimes really sad, fearful, withdrawn, sulky, but sometimes it can be really angry, disruptive, demanding, stubborn, opinionated, and nasty. And it's like, what's going on? Which is my inner child?
But I like what you're doing, because you're showing us the
there's
emotional pendulum.
Two opposite ends of personality.
Absolutely. And again, we've done lots of videos on this. So it can be the same energy, but it can manifest in two different ways. It can manifest in a really scared, frightened child who doesn't want to budge. But that child can also be obstinate, strong, can tell you where to go. It can be very powerful and very strong, but it's the same energy. So this is my tip. Always go to the youngest one first. So if you are in this situation where you think, I've got this really child that's about 6 or 7 and she's really scared and she's confused, or he's confused, he doesn't understand. Then I've got this bullshit teenager who tells everybody to go and get lost. Try and go to the inner child first.
The youngest one first.
The youngest one first.
And why is that important to start with the youngest one? Well,
because that was the core. You'll normally find that that's the core. Then it's almost like layers on top of coping mechanisms.
Oh, okay.
So the first child, the youngest child, let me say, it's difficult to use the words, isn't it? The youngest part.
Inner child.
The inner child, the youngest inner child is the one that's encountered the first disruption and they've closed down. And then you've layered other stuff on top of it. So you may go, that's never going to happen to me again. If anybody says that to me, I'll show them. But that's also not you. You've just swung to the other side. I show how many of my clients have either they mimic their parents. So I wish I had a pound or $1 for every client who said to me, I'm just like my mom, I'm just like my dad, I'm just the same. So they've mimicked. And I wish I had another $1 for all those who have swung the other side and said, I would never do what they do. I'm going to do the direct opposite. If they say black, I'm going to say white. And what we're talking about, that's what Alex showed you. We want to be in the middle, where you are who and what you want to do, not as a response for other people. Do not let other people define your life. You should define your life. Don't work and act and live in reaction. Live in proaction, that you are proactively living your life authentically and truthfully to you. And this is why this is why I'm so passionate about these teachings, because I truly believe that when you come into your Wu Wei, when you come off the extremes, when you start to live your life proactively, following your Wu Wei course, this is life-changing. And this can happen relatively quickly. You don't have to go into this for years and years and 10 years and 15 years. Once you take control of your belief system, once you take personal and emotional self-responsibility, once you put your hand on your rudder of your boat, your life's going to change.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. So I think what you said there is we can maybe relate to different parts of our childhood, different ages, but to begin with the youngest inner child that we can visualize, because that was the point at which the energy of our mind became blocked, split apart from the oneness, and went into shutdown. And every even as a child after that, as we've grown up, maybe as a teenager, we've layered protection and coping strategies on top of that original separated part of our mind that we call the inner child. So to begin to unravel that, to begin to heal that inner child, we have to go back to the original age, the first incidents, if we can. Now, we've talked about the emotions, and I think it's the easiest part of connecting to your inner child and understanding their personality is to tap into their emotional expression. So whether that's sad, fearful, withdrawn, scared, or angry, stubborn, bitter, nasty, demanding. But to do the inner child work, what we need to get a better understanding of in terms of their personality and their needs is the actual issues that they are stuck with.
Not the emotion.
Not the emotion. So I know in common terms, inner child work terms, there is identified the abandoned inner child as one personality type or one set of needs. There is the fearful inner child, again, as another inner child type. And then there is the playful inner child. And I just want to talk about those in terms of what they actually mean. So if we start with the abandoned inner child.
So these are Western definitions.
These are Western definitions for the different types of inner child. But essentially the abandoned inner child is the child who has been neglected in childhood. So do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of their needs or the life lessons that they could be needing to learn?
So their needs are that they believe that they require, and it's absolutely essential for external love. Mm-hmm. They believe that love is a commodity that's given to them or restricted and withdrawn from them. So what they're looking for is to earn love. Mm-hmm. Now, if this is you, this would manifest in pleasing people, always wanting to be perfect, never wanting to make mistakes, worrying about what other people think about you. We've done loads of videos on this stuff. Please go back into the archives and go through the videos and you'll see us talking about this. This is the inner child part of your mind, searching for validation, I call it, searching for reassurance, believing that they will never be able to be whole. Mm-hmm. A lot of my clients will use this analogy. I think it's a wonderful analogy. It's like a jigsaw with a piece missing and they're looking for another piece to make them whole. Yeah. And I have to convince them that they are already whole and awesome and divine. And when I look at you and say, you are awesome, you are divine, you are made of cosmic stardust, I truly believe it. You do not need that external validation, approval to make you whole. You are already whole. That's who you are. And if the child doesn't get that teaching, and then they're in a dysfunctional family or with dysfunctional carers, or something happens to them like divorce or death at a very early age, they're left, and this is what my clients say to me, David, there's like a hole. Yeah. There's like a hole, an emptiness, a big chasm. And this is when people then start to overeat, for instance, or undereat. They use food to try and control that chasm. This is when they drink too much, take drugs, whatever it is, they're trying to fill that chasm that can't be filled.
And so I guess with that abandoned inner child who basically believes they're not good enough, that's the core lie that they've held within them and they've gone into lockdown. And the inner child work for that child is to understand that they are good enough, that they don't need this validation.
Well, you've got to teach them the life lesson. And so this is why we do the videos. So if they're good enough to share with you, so here's something they may say, well, it's obviously I'm not good enough or I'm unlovable, because shouldn't my parents love me? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't my parents always be there for me? And I often say, so do you believe your parents sit around the kitchen table when you've gone to bed and say, our little child, isn't she unlovable? Isn't she terrible? Mm. Oh, we're not going to love her at all. Because the child has got a basic misunderstanding. Remember what I said about the vow. The child, when they experience that lack of parental love or attention or reassurance or validation, then said the vow, I'm not getting this, it must be me. Mm. When actually, it's nothing to do with them. It's the inability of their parents, their carers. Yeah. It's their emotional education. And this is what you'll find. If you ever want to check me out on what I'm saying, not only look at your parents, but look at their parents. Look how they were parented. And these emotional misunderstandings, lies, I call them. Let's call them what I call them. These emotional lies passed down through the generation. But it has to stop with you. Because if you're not careful, you'll just pass it on. Because if you believe that to be true, then this is what we're talking about. This is the kernel. This is what's creating the separation. And if we don't do this work, this is why this work is life-changing, not only to you, to your children, to your grandchildren, because we want to pass down good emotional education. We want people to understand that love is not a commodity that you have to earn or get. You don't earn that validation. You can give it to yourself, and then that cuts out the third person. You can love yourself. You can respect yourself. You can honor yourself. You can nurture yourself. In Taoism, we call that Qiang, the art of self-nurturing and self-nourishment. That's your job to do for you.
And you will do that as part of the inner child healing process and all the work we're talking about now.
But that's what you're doing. When you go back and educate the child, you're giving the child attention, validation, you're listening to that child, you're teaching that child, and that's what that child wants. It wants attention. It wants somebody to sit there, not to agree with it, but just to say, you've got this bit wrong, son. When I'm talking to my clients as inner child, I would recommend always call it a little pet name. Okay, darling. Okay, sweetheart. Okay, son. Okay, little one. Little one, you've got this wrong. I've got to tell you, you've got this wrong. And they might, but then, I always say to my clients, your child might be stubborn, but I tell you one thing your child is not. Your child is not stupid. It knows. Somewhere deep in you, you know, if I'm saying something that you know is right, you might get a pushback and say, oh, I can't do that. That's too difficult. That's for other people. I haven't got the knowledge. But be honest. Somewhere in you, you know, I am right. And that inner truth that you've got to get to.
And connecting to that inner truth is really part of the inner child healing process that we've talked about in other videos. And David, when you talk about the abandoned inner child there and its sort of needs and the life lessons it needs to learn, you touched upon the other lie, I'm not lovable, and that's very much connected to this idea of a fearful inner child, the child who was criticized, or the child who was abused, and therefore now thinks, that part of your mind now believes that it's not lovable. So all the same principles, what you've just talked about with the abandoned inner child, also apply to this idea of a fearful inner child.
I specialize in working with adults, clients who've been abused sexually, emotionally, mentally. And it never ceases to amaze me, after 45 years of working with these clients, how that part of the mind blames themselves. I can't understand it. It just, for me, how they believe a 6-year-old can be part of that abuse. And that's one of the things you have to teach your inner child. Because if you've been abused, you've also been manipulated, tricked, hoodwinked, whatever you want to call it. And that's part of the abuse. Part of what the abuser has done is try to trick you to think you are part of the deal. You are not part of the deal. You were used. And this is part of I'm doing this now with about 4 or 5 clients, trying to convince their inner child, because their inner child doesn't want to admit that they've been groomed. But that's what happened, because they've been groomed so well that they believed they were part of it. You was not part of it at all. And this is, again, what you say. This is the separation, that they think they're soiled. They think they're evil. They think they're bad. They think they're evil. They think they're in a dark place. And again, as I said earlier, there's no dark place. There's a scared child stuck in a corner and needs some help and guidance, needs some clear spiritual teachings to convince them that their spirituality, that candle of love, of hope, of well-being, has never been blown out. It cannot be blown out. It's the thing that survives you physically. You come from source. You will return to source. You are source. So that spirituality that we call Shen is your spiritual compass that's guiding your life. And no one can touch that. You can deny it, but no one else can touch it. And this is the teaching of Taoism. You are awesome, divine, immense. No one can touch that spirituality.
Brilliant, David. And I know that those two inner child types, the abandoned inner child and the fearful inner child, are the ones that you mostly encounter through your work. And actually, there's a big misunderstanding in that we somehow associate just kind of negative things with the inner child. And actually, once the inner child is healed and rebalanced, it's a beautiful part of your mind, because this is the creative, imaginative, free thinking, playful, delightful part of your human energy that we need to nurture and cherish. But that for some people, their inner child issues come from ignoring or pushing down this beautiful, playful part of their mind, because as an adult, they are, I guess, abandoning it. They're saying, well, I haven't got time to be creative or playful or be joyful or spontaneous. It's inappropriate as an adult for me to do that. I've got more responsibilities. I need to be more serious about life. But that too can create problems for our inner child.
It's amazing, because when you release the inner child, you see an inner child. As Alex says, wants to play. A lot of my clients, they suddenly get a new love for nature, walking, drawing, artwork, craft work, because that inner child has been almost
suppressed.
Yeah,
suppressed.
That's a great word, Alex. That's exactly the word. That's exactly the word, Alex. That's what you're doing. You're suppressing your inner child. And that's why that when you release that inner child, respect yourself. It is time to go and do daft things and mad things and do all the things that you wanted to do. And it doesn't matter what that is, because you're doing it for you. That might be traveling. That might be, I don't know what it is, whatever it is you want to do. This, you see, again, I can't be prescriptive because everyone is different. But you know that joy that you've been, Alex used absolutely the right word. You've been suppressing your joy. And this is what I say to my clients. You've got to own this. You've got to take responsibility for this. Because in some of my clients, they're abusing themselves far worse than they was ever abused. Because suppressing the vital, beautiful part of you is a terrible thing to do. And this is why I said this teaching is life-changing. This will change your life.
And for all of those, all those different needs that our inner child may have, all those issues it's stuck on, we need to make the point again that how it emotionally expresses itself could be at both ends of the spectrum. So it could be very yin, very withdrawn, fearful, scared, not sulky. It could be very yang, very angry, very stubborn, very demanding and noisy. But we have to understand they're all coming from the same place, and that the inner child healing process to release the inner child from its prison of the childhood, to allow it to flourish and grow and be creative and joyful and beautiful as part of the wholeness and oneness of you, is to first identify your inner child in the ways that we've talked about. We've got lots of videos, as I say, on the inner child, and we're going to do 2 fantastic follow-up videos for you on things you need to tell your inner child when you connect to them, and questions you need to ask your inner child, and they'll be coming very, very soon. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If anything has resonated with you, please share below. Tell us the biggest takeaway you've had from this video and post your questions below. You know we always love to hear from you. If you'd like to work one-to-one with David on any of these issues, David works every week with clients via video call, and I will put a link in the video description below.
All over the world.
All over the world. I'll put a link in the video description below so you can learn more about David's sessions. If you're new to our channel, we produce new videos every week. If you have enjoyed this video, please share it with someone who you think will benefit. But please, if you're not already a subscriber, please do subscribe and click the bell notifications button when you subscribe, so you'll get a little email notification every time we publish a new video. We look forward to seeing you very soon. Bye-bye.